Hello, adventurers! This is Jim Zub, writer of Conan the Barbarian and Dungeons & Dragons, and you're listening to The Tale of the Manticore.
The following podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Tale of the Manticore, Season 3. Like the creature from which it takes its name, Tale of the Manticore is a mashup, a crossbreeding between two different species of storytelling. Here you will find the unpredictability of old-school paper and dice games with the storycraft of a dark fantasy novel. No character is sacred, and none will be spared if the dice decide their fate is at hand. According to lore, the tale of a manticore is barbed with cruel iron spikes. There will be much pain in the days ahead. Last time on Tale of the Manticore. In Chapter 19, I used a mechanic from my one-shot in the dark ultralight solo game to generate the dungeon that is the Murok family crypt. After the initial room, which the companions entered through the ceiling, they encountered a room of statues, then followed a curving hallway where they found the remains of a tomb robber from long ago, impaled on a sprung spear trap. The next encounter was far more dramatic. At a four-way intersection, the PCs came face to, well, they met the headless ghost of Prince Learhain. Through the use of a message spell, Achillea was able to communicate with it and learn that the way to the inner crypt was to the west. The scene is now set for a climactic encounter, as the quest to return the remains of the Kaymor Prince is about to be completed. But we can't jump into the story just yet. I'm impatient to find out what will happen next, and I know that Fairwind only has a few minutes of light remaining on his makeshift torch, but there's a couple of things that need to be settled before the story can go on. First up, I am happy to announce that Achillea has made it to level 3. I do love a good level up, especially with magic users. Let's get into it before my enthusiasm jinxes these dice. Starting with a d4 for new hit points. I've got a 1. Min that out to 2 and Achillea's new total goes up to 9. Not a very auspicious start, but that's okay. Hit points are probably the least important part of a magic user's character sheet. Let's move on to potential stat increases. Going down the line and rolling a d6, any 6s will indicate a bonus. Let's begin. Strength. A 6. Was not expecting that. I suppose it's from all the time on the road. It has been over a couple of weeks now, so I suppose that would toughen her up. 10 goes to 11. Intelligence. A 1. Wisdom. I've got a 2. Dexterity. Another 2. How about Constitution? 2 again. That's the third in a row. And our last chance for one more stat increase? Charisma. A 2. 4 2s in a row. You know, if those had been 6s, I'd have worried that listeners wouldn't believe it. But 2s, far more credible. Moving on. We are now rolling for new spells, which is the only part of the magic user's level up that truly matters. A lot is riding on this roll, both in terms of character power and story development. Furthermore, level 3 is where a wizard gets their first second level spell. This means I need to make a new table. Hang tight while I go away and do that. I'm back, and you know, that was harder than I thought it would be. After pruning spells that have featured prominently in previous seasons for the sake of keeping things fresh, there wasn't much left that really inspired. To be honest, second level spells are often a bit underwhelming, and even some of the ones I've selected from my Season 3 list are, well, not especially inspiring. Anyway, I picked 10 potential spells, 4 of which are from later editions of D&D. I'll post the list on the blog after this episode airs in case you're curious to see it. Here's the roll. A 9. What's that? Okay, kind of appropriate for someone with elf blood. I've got Glitter Dust. Here's the brief. Glitter Dust fills a 20-foot cube space with glittering particles. Those inside it must save or be blinded for 1d4 rounds, plus 1 round per caster level. The spell can reveal invisible creatures. It has a range of 10 yards per caster level. It's funny, Detect Invisible is one of the spells I removed from my list of potentials. And the later addition Blindness spell I chose not to include because it overlapped with Continual Light. If I could shrug on a podcast, I would do that right now. Anyway, Glitter Dust does seem like a neat spell, and I've never used it in any game before, so if for no other reason, I'm quite satisfied with the roll. A quick note to say that Achillea won't be able to cast it until she has rested and studied. Moving right along, I need to spend a minute or two figuring out what the PCs are going to find in the final room. In the last episode, I rolled that there would be a dangerous encounter here. I have a few options. They could encounter the vengeful spirit of Queen Anaya, or that of her court wizard, or there could be something else lurking in the inner crypt. As usual, the dice will decide. I'll roll a d8 and say that on a 1 to 3, the PCs will face the ghost of Queen Anaya. On a 4 to 6, the court wizard. On a 7, it'll be something totally unexpected, and on an 8, it'll be a combination of foes. The roll. A 2, so it's Queen Anaya. Part of me was hoping for that, I'll be honest. Let's put a pin in that for a second and describe the inner crypt. It's a wedge-shaped room of about 60 feet in length, 20 feet at the entrance, and 40 at the back end, which bulges out slightly. Arranged 3 to each side are stone slabs, which have skeletons reclining on them, dressed in ceremonial clothing. There's a 7th slab at the rear of the crypt, between the final 2, but this slab is not only empty of any occupant, it is cracked down the middle, sundered and broken in 2 pieces. The occupants of the other 6 are, starting at the entrance and moving around the room counterclockwise, Murok and Anaya's first child, who had died very young. Then, halfway between the entrance and the back wall on the right side, is a royal bodyguard in rusted armor. Next is a slab holding the remains of the court wizard. The broken slab, he would have been Murok's, but he didn't die in these lands, is next. It was cracked in half upon the event of Sadal's curse. Continuing counterclockwise, we have the Queen's slab, then another royal guard, and finally the slab belonging to Prince Learhain, or most of him, anyway. His skeleton is missing the skull. All other skeletons have skulls that are decorated with jet and turquoise, as was determined back in episode 13 with the randomly rolled mythic event meaning, Extravagant Death. Finally, all the skeletons also have some other small treasures or accoutrements, along with their bones. All this implies that the tomb robbers, who initially stole Learhain's skull, got this far, robbed the tomb, and then, before they could take anything else, left. I think that they met the spirit of the queen, and that it was the disturbing of the contents of the tomb that invoked her wrath and caused her to appear. I don't want to delay the narrative any longer, so I think at this point I'll take off my DM hat and let the story happen for a while. Whatever needs to be figured out later can be figured out later. Chapter 20, Part 1, Day 16, Late Afternoon. Mythic event meaning. Agree, tension. Party status. Achillea, 9 out of 9 hit points. Cord, 8 of 14. Dureni, 9 of 9. Tentir, 10 of 10. Spells available. Achillea has memorized Message. Cord can cast Entangle, Locate plants and animals, and Slow poison. Before she had taken 3 steps, Achillea felt a hand on her shoulder. When she turned around, Fairwind was looking down at her with a strange expression on his face.
Just then, when the lights went out, at first, I thought we were all going to die.
I don't...
began Achillea, not really understanding.
Shh. My second thought,
Fairwind continued,
was that I was going to die having wasted my life. Having failed to do the one thing that I promised Sadal I would do.
The cleric paused, bit his lower lip, and continued.
But when the light came back on, that was Sadal giving me a second chance. You see?
I think so, but why are you telling me this?
Asked Achillea.
Because I believe that we are about to face the darkness again. And I want you to know that this time,
Fairwind tapped the holy symbol that hung around his neck with the head of his cudgel.
This time, whatever may happen, I promise to protect you. All of you, you can trust me.
I do trust you.
Said Achillea. She reached into her bag, feeling for Prince Learhain's skull.
Come on, let's catch up.
Durrani and Tentir were a dozen feet ahead of them and had almost reached the archway leading into the crypt beyond.
Are you ready, little mouse?
Asked Durrani to Tentir. He could hear the conversation taking place behind him, and although he couldn't understand the words, he felt sure it did not concern him or his brother. Tentir's face was pale, and his forehead was beaded with sweat, despite the cool temperature underground. The younger elf nodded all the same.
I'm ready.
They passed under the archway and entered a kind of place that few elves have ever seen.
This is strange,
said Tentir, looking around in wonder and fear and trying to keep the tremor from his voice.
Do all humans do this with their dead?
He was referring to the method of burial, how the corpses had been left exposed and supine on their stone slabs to decay over decades. But he was also pointing out that those skeletons that still had their skulls had them decorated in jet and turquoise, just like the one he had found in the ogre's cave. Durrani did not think that all humans did this with their dead, but he wasn't really sure, so he just muttered,
"Touch nothing,"
and led them further inside. He too had noticed that one of the stone slabs held a headless skeleton. He was directly to their left when they entered. After the others had passed under the archway and all the companions were assembled, he pointed it out to Achillea. She nodded grimly and pulled a bundle from her satchel. Lirhain's skull was still cocooned in her clothes to keep it safe. She began to unwrap it. While she did that, Fairwind looked around with an expression of determination on his face. He saw that the crypt was shaped like an axe head, narrow at one side and wide at the other. The cleric regarded each of the slabs and their occupants in turn. When his gaze reached the broken slab against the middle of the far wall, he pointed at it with his cudgel.
That one would have been Morok's.
Cord twisted his body to look, and his torso gave a little squeak of wood that contrasted with the stillness of the crypt.
Achillea, you may restore the prince to his final rest. I will say the prayer for the dead.
Achillea by now had the small decorated skull unwrapped and cradled in both hands. She approached the prince's slab with solemnity. The child had been about her height, she supposed, judging by the bones and by what she had experienced in her dreams. A few scraps remained of what had once been a skirt of brocade. A small silver rod wound with silver thread and topped with an orb of some white stone, laid by the prince's left hand. Achillea took a deep breath and turned to Fairwind, who now held his once again waning torch aloft.
O divine fire, we ask you to receive this loyal ember who has spent the fuel of their life. Look over and protect them. Let them join the stars in the sky so that they may bear witness to your magnificence and glory for all eternity.
He nodded to Achillea, who took this as her cue to set the skull down. She did so, and the cleric continued.
And by your blessings and grace, provide light for those of us who yet burn until we may too join you in the heavens. With all our hearts, let this be. Amen.
There came a strange keening noise from the far end of the crypt before Fairwind could speak its final word, and as one, the companions turned to look. Tentir was not assembled with the others around Lirhain's slab. There had not been enough room, and so he and Cord were standing a little behind. The cleric's prayer, which he couldn't understand, had quickly lost his interest, and so he had turned instead to the slab opposite. This one also bore the skeleton of a child, an even younger one, he guessed. The whole body would have measured only 2.5 feet, from toes to top. It too had a silver rod near its hand. Tentir had only just put his fingers upon it when the cleric said the final word of his prayer, and the noise had come. The young elf snatched his hand away from the rod as though it had burned his fingertips, and snapped his head in the direction of the noise. In the poor flickering light from Fairwind's torch, he saw something strange and terrifying. Chapter 20, Part 2, Day 16, Late Afternoon. Mythic event meaning. Agree tension. Party status. The party status is unchanged. The Queen's slab was vibrating. As the vibrations grew stronger, the bones and the treasure placed upon it began to hop and dance upon its flat surface, as though a tiny earthquake was occurring directly below it. Then a wisp of pale green smoke blew up from the queen's remains. It rose into the air like a ribbon caught in an eddy of wind before taking on the vague shape of a woman. As the vapors grew more defined, the companions could see slashes and cuts covering face, neck, and arms. In one of her arms was a swaddled bundle, but the ghostly blanket wrapped around it was purple with blood. The specter's eyes were dark hollows, and her hair streamed out behind her, lifting and writhing like tentacles. Her whole shape bobbed and undulated, defying gravity, as if it floated not in air, but under the water. In an otherworldly voice, it spoke.
Why have you come where you should not have come?
Demanded the apparition. When the party members failed to answer, she let out a low moan, dropping her lower jaw impossibly far, as though it were unhinged.
Did you come here to mock the dead? Did you come here to witness my grief? Then look upon the very picture of the lost and forsaken.
Somehow Achillea found her voice.
Your Highness, we are here to restore the remains of Prince Lirhain, that he might find rest.
Yes, I can feel that my son has been returned to me. And for this, I would have thanked you, if it were not for the insult you fling to my face.
Achillea had no idea where she had found the courage to address this creature. It was waning quickly.
We meant no offense,
she said meekly.
No offense,
Seethed the queen. The apparition lifted her free arm and pointed a blood-red fingertip at Fairwind.
and yet you lead the betrayer's servant to my very grave.
The spirit reared back, once again moaning in its awful voice, and then surged forward. But at a short distance from its slab, it stopped, straining like a dog against its leash. It must have been somehow tethered to her grave. It groaned again.
You, slave of the fire god, are not welcome here.
Fairwind stood his ground, defiant in the face of her wrath, and Achillea could not believe his bravery. She saw him set down his makeshift torch at the foot of Lirhain's slab, and then, with his hand now free, reached for the holy symbol that hung from his neck by a chain.
Do not think to banish me, thrall the unjust Lord. I have complaint against thy god, and thy presence is hateful to me.
Sadal is the light of justice. It is you who betrayed him.
Fairwind called back. The cleric's threadbare gown had begun to rustle and flap around him, as though he were standing in a gust of wind.
I shall endure no lies or blasphemies.
The sins of the king are inflicted upon his wife, his people, the innocent, and you call it justice? Sadal's light has blinded you, priest.
Fairwind gripped his holy symbol, now in a clenched fist. He never broke eye contact with the vengeful spirit for a moment, and his voice did not waver.
Begone from this world!
He yelled.
Go back to whatever dark hell you call home!
Supernatural power enveloped the cleric. His robe was now flapping loudly, and even his hair lifted in the spiritual wind.
I suffer no hell, priest, but the purgatory of lost souls. There is another who suffers here too.
The spirit's voice became sardonic.
Your dear Harlow wanders aimlessly in the dark, shedding tears of grief. Grief over your failure. Grief over your betrayal.
Never speak that name.
Oh yes, Harlow suffers, just as you all suffer for this
expression.
The spirit swept her arm in a line in front of her, leaving a silvery trail of vapor in his wake.
Arise, my faithful!
When the motion was complete, the two skeletal warriors on the crypt's middle slabs sat up with pinpricks of crimson light shining from the eye sockets of their jet and turquoise-covered skulls. Dramatis Personae, Dalen Fairwind. All followers of Sidal embark on 2 6-month pilgrimages as part of their education. First, as a novice, they are paired with a mentor to learn firsthand how to spread the word among the common people. When finished, the mentor blesses the novice and grants them their own holy symbol, marking them as full members of the church. Some years later, when the mentor deems them ready, the novice becomes the teacher and is paired with their own acolyte. Dalen had earned his holy symbol some 30 years ago, when he had only just reached adulthood. When the time came for him to lead another in the way of the faith, he could hardly believe the day had arrived. His life as a cleric had all gone by so quickly. He was assigned a novice named Harlow Aarons, a reed-thin, slouching young man with dark hair and a tremulous, wispy voice. At first blush, they seemed an odd fit, the garrulous, enthusiastic priest and the withdrawn, reclusive acolyte. But over many miles of walking on the long road to Camaranth, Dalen gradually drew Harlow out of his shell. To pass the time, they would create poetry together, adding stanzas to each other's work as they mused on the blessings of Sidal and the beauty of the natural world.
My eyes drink in the forest green, and birdsong fills my ears.
Sidal provides the morning light and eases all my fears.
These poems proved an effective way to open the hearts of the villagers outside the city, and after months of traveling from town to town as missionaries, they had crafted an impressive body of work. Dalen and Harlow were eager to return to the Church of the Sacred Flame in Silmoral and add their poems to the library.
And after that, will I be ready for my own symbol of Sidal?
Harlow had asked.
Soon, my brother. Patience in all things,
Came the reply from Dalen, but he was just as excited to reward his faithful protege. That excitement turned to dread when they finally returned to Silmoral and approached the church and found the proclamation nailed to the front door. It had read, "Whereas we have taken into our royal consideration, it is hereby decreed that all properties and chattel belonging to the Church of the Sacred Flame be held in custody for an indefinite period of time. By royal order, all residents are hereby placed under arrest, pending the trial of the following accused of treason." Some 36 names were listed thereafter, including that of Araness, the High Priestess. Dalen and Harlow had been speechless at first, but later they learned by talking to some townfolk that their brothers and sisters of the cloth had been dragged out in chains, beaten and bloody, weeks earlier. An old beggar they spoke with told them,
"That bastard Calfrey made a law that all you priests of the old god are heretics to the crown. Every soul that used to live in yonder church now rots in his dungeons. So now where am I supposed to get my bread and ale, eh? Spare a penny for a good man, brother."
Wide-eyed, Harlow looked to his mentor.
Dalen, we must save them.
Shaking, Dalen tucked the holy symbol that hung around his neck into the folds of his robe and said,
No, Harlow, it's far too dangerous. Sidal will provide for our brethren. Our mission has changed now. We must leave.
With that, they hurried back out the city gates, refugees from the city they called home. That night, they huddled by their campfire, racked with worry. At last, Harlow broke the silence.
Do you think our brothers in Mirpur are safe?
I hope so.
Dalen had replied.
We must put our trust in Sidal's mercy.
The next morning, they made their way to Mirpool to give warning to the church there, but their distress was only deepened by what they found. A phalanx of Palfrey's guards lingered in the town square, eyeing the villagers and laughing gruffly among themselves. The chains on the church door were visible even at a distance.
We dare not stay here,
Dalen said in low tones.
But I know now where we must go.
Thus began their journey of several weeks to the birthplace of the Caymores. The duo were unprepared for the length and hardships of the journey, and their remaining food was quickly depleted. The men soon found themselves battling hunger pains on top of the rigors of the wilderness. Once again, they used poetry to lift their spirits.
On we trudge, through day and night, beset by grief and fear.
Our single candle has the light to make our journey clear.
Days passed, and then weeks. Dalen began to regret his decision to steer clear of Zation settlements. While he retained much of his natural vitality, Harlow's spare frame became nearly skeletal. Water had been easy enough to find, but the companions had been without ample food for days by the time they finally reached the ruins. Amidst the broken stone foundations was one crumbling building that remained mostly intact. Inside, they found shelter from the elements, but little else. Harlow slumped to the dirt floor as dusk settled in. Dalen made a fire and said,
"Rest, my friend. I'll find us something to eat."
He grabbed a torch and headed out, delirious with hunger and fatigue. Venturing amongst the ruins as dusk gave way to night, Dalen was startled to see another figure moving between the scraggly trees, some 50 feet away.
"Hello! Hello, friend! Praise the Lord!"
Dalen made his way eagerly in their direction. But as he got closer, he realized something was amiss. The person, if you could call them that, wore the simple garb of a farmer, but their skin hung in tatters, and their lifeless eyes stared at nothing. The creature suddenly became aware of Dalen and lurched at him. Dalen fell to the ground and scrambled away. As it bore down upon him, he instinctively reached for his holy symbol and shouted,
"Get back! The light of Sadal protects me!"
The silver medallion shone brightly in the dark, and the creature turned away, retreating to the shadows. For some moments later, Dalen lay on the ground, gasping for air. In his studies, he had been taught that the undead were unable to harm a priest of Sadal, who wielded his holy symbol with faith. But this was his first actual experience of it. He clung to the medallion and wept with gratitude. Suddenly, he bolted up.
"Oh no! Harlow!"
Without a holy symbol of his own, he would be helpless if one of these monsters were to find him. He scrambled to his feet, grabbed the torch, and ran as fast as he could back to the ruins. As Dalen drew closer, his worst fears were realized. The door to the building was off its hinges, and, just in front of it, another zombie was tearing at Harlow, who was helplessly weak, unable to put up any resistance. Dalen brandished his symbol again, turning the vile thing away. But the damage was done. Bloody scratches and bite wounds too numerous to count ravaged Harlow's face, neck, and limbs. Dalen dropped to the ground and cradled the novice priest's head.
"Oh, my son, I'm so sorry! Oh, this is my fault, I am so sorry!"
Harlow looked up at Dalen, the light rapidly fading from his eyes, and whispered,
A single candle has the light to make our journey clear.
On we trudge through day and night, beset by grief and fear.
Dalen sobbed in reply as Harlow took his last breath. Fairwind is trying to turn this spirit, but what he doesn't know is that he is completely outclassed. There is no chance for him to turn Queen Anaya. Her type of undead is just not within reach of a first-level cleric. So what exactly is she? I looked through every monster book I had and rejected everything I came across. She's not a wight or a ghost or a specter. She isn't a crimson spirit or a revenant. I was looking for something in the neighborhood of Wraith or even the Yorona, if you're familiar with that kind of supernatural entity. I looked at the Banshee and the Groaning Spirit, but these were not really appropriate. Even a straight-up Wraith would not work, mostly because any of these foes, especially the level-draining ones, are simply too powerful for the PCs to face, and I did want an encounter that the PCs could at least try to fight. All this is my long-winded way of saying I'm making up a new monster for this encounter. I'll start with the Wraith as a base, and then make some tweaks. A Wraith is a 4-hit die monster with a morale of 12. These stats stay the same. They are immune to sleep, charm, and hold spells, and can only be hit by silver or magic weapons. These elements also stay the same, but bear with me, you'll see where I'm going with this thing. A Wraith attacks with a necrotic touch that does 1 to 6 points of damage and drains a level on a missed saving throw. This is the part that gets cut. Queen Anaya is a different kind of Wraith. We'll call her a Cursed Wraith. She cannot attack directly. Instead, she can animate an amount of dead around her equal to her own hit dice. She could have animated 4 one-hit die skeletons with the remains in the crypt, but instead she has put 2 hit die into each of her former royal bodyguards, and it appears that they will now serve her one last time. There's no need to roll up the Queen's hit points, but I will roll up and go over the stats for the skeletal warriors. They each have 11 hit points. They have an armor class of, normal skeletons have a descending AC of 7, which I think is 13 ascending. But these guys are wearing some rusted plate mail. I'm ruling that they'll have an AC of 15. They wield long swords, so that's 1 to 8 points of damage on a successful hit. Finally, even though the BX book does not include the rule that skeletons take half damage from piercing and edged weapons, I do like that aspect, and I balanced this encounter with the ability in mind, so I'm putting it in. The Elven Brothers' swords and Achilles' knife will be much less effective in this fight than Fairwood's cudgel. Cord's axe is heavy and I think would do full damage. That's my ruling anyway. If the Queen's bodyguards are destroyed, Anaya will not be able to use her powers again that day, and so the battle will essentially be over. The Queen's spirit will be forced to return to her purgatory. Looking at the runtime for this episode, I see that we're already well over the 20-minute mark. I can't enter into combat at this point. I'll need to save that for next time. Instead, I'll just invite you to imagine this scene as a freeze frame, with Fairwind clutching his symbol, face defiant, with the companions poised on the verge between fight and flight, with the skeleton warriors hopping nimbly off their slabs, and with the spectral queen tormented, full of hate, and thirsting for revenge. Thank you for listening to and for supporting Tale of the Manticore. This episode has run longer than usual, so I'm going to jump right into the credits, and this episode features a big cast. In order of appearance, this episode's voice actors are Dave Cooper as Fairwind, Kyellen as Dureni, Kevin Berenger as Tentir, Fiona Howitt, host and GM of the What Am I Rolling podcast as the Wraith of Queen Anaya, Winston Cooper as Harlow the Novice, and Carl White of the Lone Adventurer podcast as the Old Beggar. My eternal gratitude goes to all my actors. Each of them did a superb job. Extra thanks is due to Dave Cooper, who wrote this episode's Dramatis Personae section, in which some of Fairwind's backstory is revealed. Great job, Dave. You nailed it. The adventure will continue on the next episode of Tale of the Manticore. It's the story where chaos rolls.